My husband left me for my cousin, saying she was more fun, so I showed up at their wedding to ruin everything. My wedding ring lived in a little dish by my kitchen sink for way longer than it deserved, just sitting there next to a worn-out sponge and a half-empty bottle of generic soap like it was another piece of clutter I kept forgetting to deal with. And every time I washed my hands, I felt that tiny punch in the chest that said, very clearly, that my life had gone completely off script, and I still had no idea what to do with that. I used to tell myself I would move it tomorrow, that I would finally put it in a drawer or sell it or throw it in a river or whatever people in movies did. But then I would make coffee, go to work, answer emails, stare at my phone, and suddenly it was midnight, and the ring was still there, shining back at me like a bad joke. My name is Kendra, and I got married when I was 23, which sounded very adult back then, and now just feels like I was a kid cosplaying as a grown woman in an expensive dress I could not afford. I had been with my college boyfriend for 3 years, and everyone around us kept doing that thing where they smile too grande and ask, in that fake casual tone, when we are finally making it official, as if love had a deadline and my uterus had an expiration date stamped on it. We were not rich or glamorous or anything close to that. We were just two normal people in a medium-sized American city, counting paychecks and pretending that sharing bills meant we were ready to share a life. He worked in sales for a local company that did something boring with equipment. And I worked as an administrative assistant at a medical clinic that always smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. In the beginning, honestly, it was good. I am not going to lie and rewrite the past like nothing was ever right between us, because that would be too easy and also not true. Our apartment was tiny and the walls were thin, but it felt like ours. And I used to fall asleep with his arm thrown over my waist thinking, this is it. This is that feeling everyone posts about on that social media app with the cute filters and the fake perfection. We had a low-budget honeymoon where we drove to a small town with a lake and stayed in a rental that had tacky decorations and a bed that squeaked every time we breathed. And I remember feeling stupidly happy just cooking pasta with him in a borrowed kitchen. He carried our bags. He opened doors. He made stupid jokes that were not even funny. And I ate it all up because I thought that was what partnership looked like. The first months of marriage were this blur of shared grocery lists, late-night shows on the couch, and him leaving his socks exactly where I would trip on them. And I kept telling myself that this messy, ordinary routine was exactly what I wanted. We did not fight much. And when we did, it was the kind of fight that ends with both people apologizing over takeout while sitting on the floor. So I took that as a sign that we were solid. If there were cracks, I did not see them. Or maybe I just did not want to see them, because I had already printed the photos and posted the captions and let people congratulate me on finding my person. And it is very hard to admit out loud that you might have chosen wrong when the ink on your wedding album is still drying. In those early months, our problems were small in the way that feels almost cute when you talk about it later. The kind of stuff you complain about to friends, but you are secretly happy to have. Like arguing over which cheap takeout place was our place, or who was worse at remembering to take the trash down the stairs on the right night, so we would not get another passive-aggressive note from the building management. I learned the pattern of his snores and the way he would talk in his sleep sometimes about spreadsheets and deadlines, which should have been my first sign that he took work way more seriously than he took rest. But at the time, I just thought it was funny and told him about it over breakfast while he made bad jokes about finally dreaming of something other than my face. On weekends, we would walk around our neighborhood like we owned it, even though we were just two people splitting rent on a place with thin walls and loud neighbors, pointing at houses we would never afford and saying dumb things like, that one, if we ever win the lottery, even though neither of us actually bought tickets. His mother would call sometimes and ask if he was eating well and if I was taking care of him, like he was a teenager who had just moved into a dorm instead of a grown man with a wife who also had a full-time job. And I would laugh it off and say yes, because I thought that was just how mothers are, a little overbearing and dramatic. Looking back, there were tiny flashes even then, like the way he would roll his eyes when I mentioned being tired from work and say he was exhausted too, but then list all the reasons his exhaustion was more important, or the way he strutted a little when my relatives called him such a catch at family dinners. But at the time, I filed those things under normal marriage challenges and moved on. I wanted so badly for our story to be the opposite of the messy relationships I had grown up watching that I treated any discomfort like a stain I just had to scrub harder, smile bigger, accommodate more, as if I could keep everything clean and soft and safe if I just tried hard enough. And for a while, I believed it was working. Everything stayed in that cute little picture frame for less than a year, and then my family decided to shatter it for me. even though they would say it was all in the name of togetherness and tradition and all those noble words people use when they want you to do something that is going to hurt you. My extended family is obsessed with gatherings, like big, loud reunions where everyone brings a dish that is either underseasoned or aggressively salty. Children are running everywhere, and some uncle will definitely say something politically incorrect before dessert. That year, my uncle suggested a long weekend retreat in the mountains at this rental house a few hours away from the city. And of course, my mother loved the idea immediately, because family bonding apparently cures everything from anxiety to unpaid bills in her head. I was lukewarm about it, but my husband was surprisingly excited, saying it would be nice to really get to know everyone, which sounded sweet at the time, and now just makes me want to roll my eyes into another dimension. There was one more thing complicating the trip. My grandmother, who I'm very close to, had taken a bad fall a few weeks before and was still moving slowly, needing help with stairs and showers and pretty much everything. I was the one who took her to appointments and helped sort her pills. Not because anyone forced me, but because everyone else always had a reason to be too busy, and I could not stand the idea of her struggling alone. So when we got to the house in the mountains, with its long staircase to the main floor and bathroom doors that stuck when you tried to close them, it was obvious that someone would have to stay near her most of the time. And of course, that someone was me. While everyone else spread out between the deck, the game room, and the fire pit, I spent most of that weekend counting my grandmother's steps and pretending not to mind missing out on the fun. I helped her down to the dining table. I warmed up her food. I sat with her when she got tired and wanted to go lie down. And honestly, I did not even resent it that much because she has always been one of the few people in my family who sees me as more than just the responsible one who will figure it out. She would squeeze my hand and tell me she was sorry I was stuck with the boring job while everyone else played card games and took selfies by the trees, and I kept telling her it was fine, that we would have our own little retreat on the couch with her blanket and the old movie channel. My husband, meanwhile, slid into the center of the social scene like it was made for him. He is the type who laughs a little louder when there is an audience, who tells stories with big gestures and just the right amount of self-deprecation to look charming. And my family ate it up. I would glance through doorways and see him at the kitchen island with my cousins, leaning in, smiling, tapping his fingers on the counter as if he had lived in that house his whole life. Every time I walked by carrying my grandmother's water bottle or helping her with her sweater, I saw him with a different cluster of relatives, and the one constant was my cousin, the one who always manages to be at the center of everything without even trying. She is the one who posts glamorous selfies with inspirational captions, who somehow always has a new hairstyle and a new hobby and a new season of self-discovery every time you see her. Growing up, she was the pretty, loud, sparkly one, and I was the one who helped clean up after everyone went home. I did not think about that much anymore, or at least I pretended I did not. That weekend, every time I saw her, she was next to my husband, laughing at something he had said, touching his arm when she made a point, flipping her hair over her shoulder in that way she does that looks accidental but never actually is. I noticed it, obviously, because I am not blind. But my brain did that twisted little dance where it turns everything into proof that you are the problem if you react. I told myself I was being paranoid, and that she is like that with everyone, and that he is just friendly, and that I was exhausted and overly sensitive because I had barely slept, and my back hurt from lifting my grandmother so many times. When my grandmother dozed off in the chair and I went into the kitchen to refill her tea, I caught them standing a little too close at the counter, his shoulder brushing hers as they shared a joke about something on someone's plate. And I remember this tiny warning bell ringing in my chest. I shut it off instantly, plastered a smile on my face, and asked if anyone wanted anything from the fridge, because ignoring discomfort is kind of my specialty. We went home after that weekend, and I told myself it had been fine. My grandmother got home safely. My mother was happy with her family photos. And my husband said he had enjoyed it, which made me feel weirdly proud, as if I had hosted the whole thing personally. If there was a shift between us, it was so small at first that I could blame it on the usual suspects: work stress, fatigue, the general heaviness of adult life. Looking back now, I see every little sign like those tiny warning lights on the dashboard that I did not want to pay attention to because I was terrified of what they meant. The first big change was his schedule. Before the retreat, he used to come home sometime between late afternoon and early evening, like most people with a regular job. After the retreat, suddenly there were late nights. At first, it was 1 or 2 nights in a week where he texted me saying that some big project had gone sideways and they needed all hands, and I believed him because why would I not? Then it turned into 3 nights, then 4. And then I realized there was an entire week where he came home after I was already in bed more than once. He brought home the stress with him too. Or at least that is what it looked like. He dropped his bag more heavily by the door. He rubbed his eyes a lot. He answered my questions with half sentences, and he started wearing that permanent frown he used to make fun of on his old boss. The version of him that used to ask about my day and listen to my stories about the weird patients at the clinic disappeared. And in his place, I got this man who seemed constantly irritated and tired and just slightly annoyed by my presence. When I tried to ask if everything was okay at work, he would shrug and say I would not understand the pressure, which was a fun way of calling me dumb without using the actual word. Then there was the phone. You know how couples get lazy with their phones after a while, leaving them on cushions and tables and trusting each other not to care? That was us all through the years we were dating. His phone used to be just another object on the coffee table, screen lighting up randomly with group chats and sports alerts. One night, a few weeks after the retreat, I walked into the living room and saw him change the settings on his screen. And when I sat down, he flipped the phone face down on his leg like it was nothing. I joked about him hiding his game scores from me, and he laughed in this stiff way and said the company had told them to put a lock code on their phones because of some confidential emails. He made it sound so boring that I almost fell asleep halfway through the explanation. And that was the point, obviously. From that night on, the phone was never left unattended, never face up, never out of his pocket for long. If I walked into a room, he would tilt it away, or lock it so fast it was almost comical. And every time I noticed it and told myself not to be that wife who snoops and accuses. Our intimacy took a hit too. And I am not just talking about the bedroom. He stopped reaching for my hand on the couch. He stopped kissing me absent-mindedly when he walked by me in the kitchen. He started sitting in a separate armchair instead of beside me. And the air between us felt different, heavier, like we were both holding our breath all the time. When we did end up in bed together, it felt mechanical, rushed, like he was checking something off a list instead of being present. And I would lie awake afterwards, staring at the ceiling, wondering what exactly had shifted and why I felt like a guest in my own marriage. I tried to rationalize it for a while. I told myself that marriages go through phases, that the first year is an adjustment, that maybe we were both just tired adults with bills and aches and too much screen time. I blamed myself in all the classic ways. Maybe I had gained weight. Maybe I was nagging too much. Maybe I was too distracted by work and my grandmother. Maybe my mood had changed since the retreat and I had not noticed. That is the fun thing about being a woman who has been raised to keep the peace. You will twist yourself into a pretzel before you admit someone else might be the problem. Eventually, my confusion and anxiety got too loud to keep inside my own head, so I did what any functioning adult does. I unloaded on a friend. She is a coworker from the clinic who has seen me cry in the break room more than once, so she had already earned the right to hear the messier versions of my life. We were sitting in her car one evening after a long shift, eating fries from a paper bag and trying to avoid going home, and I told her everything. From the retreat to the late nights, to the phone, to the way I felt like I was living with a roommate who occasionally brushed against me by accident. She listened quietly at first, letting me word vomit all my fears and justifications. When I finally ran out of excuses and breath at the same time, she sighed and said the words I had been dodging in my head for weeks. She said she thought he might be seeing someone else. I laughed when she said it. This ugly, too loud laugh because it sounded so dramatic. And I insisted there was no way, that he was not that kind of person, that we had just gotten married, that he would never risk our life over some random fling. She raised an eyebrow and asked me if I was listening to myself, because everything I had just described sounded like a textbook case of someone shifting their emotional and physical energy somewhere else. I went home that night with her voice in my head and this tight knot in my stomach, and I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I had been watching too many infidelity videos online, that I needed to take a deep breath and communicate like an adult. So when he came home later than usual, smelling like a mix of cheap cologne and something I could not identify, I decided I would talk calmly, ask direct questions, and not cry. That plan lasted maybe 2 minutes. I waited until he had dropped his bag and taken off his shoes, then I followed him into the kitchen and said we needed to talk. I told him I felt like he was pulling away, that I noticed the late nights and the phone and the distance, and I asked him point blank if there was someone else. For a second, he froze in place, and I swear I saw something flicker in his eyes. But then he exploded. He pulled the classic move, the one you read about and still hope you will never see in real life. He got angry. Not just annoyed or defensive, but furious, as if I had slapped him out of nowhere. He started pacing the kitchen, raising his voice, accusing me of not trusting him, of making everything about myself, of never appreciating how hard he was working. He said I had no idea what kind of pressure he was under at work, that I spent my days sitting at a desk while he carried the financial weight of our future, which was actually hilarious because our salaries were almost the same. Every time I tried to interrupt and say I was not attacking him, just asking, he got louder, twisting my words until I started apologizing out of pure habit. It is embarrassing to admit, but within 10 minutes, I had gone from confronting him about possible cheating to saying I was sorry for doubting him and promising to be more supportive. He stormed off to take a shower without touching me, slammed the bathroom door, and I stood there in the kitchen shaking, holding onto the counter, wondering how I had ended up as the villain in my own fear. The next few days were a special kind of hell. He gave me the cold shoulder in that passive-aggressive way where he answered questions with one word, scrolled on his phone while I talked, and acted offended every time I tried to bridge the gap. I kept replaying the fight in my head, questioning every sentence I had said, wondering if I had been too harsh, if maybe I should have waited, if there was a better way to bring it up. I walked on eggshells, cooked his favorite meals, tried to be extra cheerful, and he stayed closed off, which made me feel like a needy, paranoid mess. For a minute there, I almost convinced myself that I had imagined the whole thing. That version of reality lasted exactly 1 week. It was a Friday night, and I was at home in pajama pants and an old college sweatshirt, eating cereal on the couch because I was too tired to cook, when my phone buzzed with a string of messages from that same friend from work. The first one just said my name, with way too many letters and a nervous emoji, which is never a good sign. Then there was, "Where is your husband supposed to be right now?" Followed by, "Please tell me he is not working late." I felt my heart start pounding in my ears as I typed back that he had said he was at the office dealing with some urgent project. She replied that she was at a place across town with some friends, a bar that turned into a dance floor later in the night, and she had just seen someone who looked exactly like him. Actually, she corrected herself, she had just seen him, because when she moved closer, there was no doubt. She could see his face, his haircut, the way he moved when he laughed, and on top of that, he was not alone. She told me she had watched him for a few minutes to be sure before texting, and in that very short time he had wrapped his arms around a woman and kissed her like they did not care who was watching. I remember my whole body going cold, even though I was sitting under a blanket. And my first instinct was to defend him, to say maybe it was a coworker and maybe they were just dancing, and maybe she was overreacting. I typed that and deleted it 3 times before I finally sent, "Can you please send me a picture?" It took less than a minute for my screen to light up with a photo. It was slightly blurry, like it had been taken quickly from across the room, but it was clear enough. There he was, my husband, with his hands on a woman's waist, their mouths pressed together in a way that was definitely not friendly. My eyes went straight to the woman, obviously, because part of my brain was still begging for this to be some horrible misunderstanding. And that is when I felt this second wave of nausea roll over me. Even in that dim lighting and from that distance, I recognized her. The hair, the curve of her shoulder, the way she tilted her head. She was wearing a dress I had seen earlier on her page on that social media app, the same exact one she had posed in by her bathroom mirror with a caption about self-love and new chapters. It was my cousin. I stared at the picture so long that the screen went dark and I had to tap it again. My friend sent a follow-up message saying she could take a short video if I needed more proof. And I said yes, because apparently I wanted to make sure my heart was completely shredded in high definition. The video came through a few moments later, and there was no room left for doubt. He was kissing my cousin, she was kissing him back, and they were laughing into each other's faces like they had never heard of consequences. I wish I could tell you I reacted in a dignified, movie-worthy way, but I sat there paralyzed for a while, clutching my phone like it might explode. And then I put the bowl of cereal down so hard that milk splashed over the edge and onto the coffee table. My first coherent thought was that I had to confront him, but I had no idea how to breathe, much less form words. I felt stupid, betrayed, and honestly, ridiculous for having apologized to him a week earlier, for daring to suspect anything at all. He came home later that night like nothing was wrong, which somehow managed to make it all worse. The door opened, his keys jingled, his shoes scraped against the floor, and I sat at the table waiting. The video paused on my screen, my hands shaking so much I had to grip the edge of the chair. He walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and started to ask if we had any leftovers. And that is when I hit play and turned the volume up just enough for him to hear his own laugh echoing in our quiet apartment. He froze. For a long second, he stared at the phone in my hand, watching himself on the screen with her, and I saw the exact moment when whatever story he had prepared melted off his face. There was this weird flicker, like he considered denying it for half a breath. Then he exhaled and said, very calmly, that he guessed we needed to talk. I expected tears or apologies or at least some half-hearted attempt to spin it, but he went straight into honesty in the worst way. He admitted it. He said he had been seeing her, that it had started around the time of the retreat, that they had connected while I was busy taking care of my grandmother. He used that word, connected, like it was a sweet romantic movie plot. And I saw red. I started yelling, obviously, because what else was left? And I demanded to know how he could cheat on me with someone from my own family, in public, like our vows meant nothing. He looked annoyed that I was making it dramatic. He said things had not been working between us for a while, that I had abandoned him that weekend by spending all my time with my grandmother, that I had made him feel invisible. He said my cousin had made him feel seen and appreciated, that she was fun and exciting and did not nag him about every little thing. He actually had the nerve to say that if he had met her before he married me, he would have chosen her. Like I was some consolation prize he had to settle for, until the universe delivered the deluxe version. At one point he said my cousin was clearly the favorite in the family, that everyone adored her, that she fit in better with his personality, and he implied that even my own relatives thought she deserved better than the guys she had dated before. I remember my mouth falling open because it had never once occurred to me that he had been cataloging my family members like options in a catalog. The fight went on for a while, mostly me crying and yelling and him shrugging and throwing out phrases about how life is too short to stay in something that does not feel right. At the end of it, he grabbed a bag, shoved some clothes into it without folding anything, and said he was going to stay with her, for now. For now, as if that somehow made the whole thing more casual and less catastrophic. He walked out the door with his bag and his phone and his new reality, and I sank to the floor in an apartment that suddenly felt like it did not belong to me at all. The next week was a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and humiliation. He moved fast, faster than I thought was physically possible, and filed for divorce almost immediately. We had not been married long and we did not own a house together, so everyone assured me it would be a simple, clean process, which is such a hilarious way to describe the legal dismantling of your entire future. Simple, sure. Clean, absolutely not. I had this stupid little folder hidden in the back of my closet with ideas for our first wedding anniversary. Lists of places we could visit, notes about restaurants I wanted to try, and a screenshot of a dress I thought about buying. I found that folder while looking for some old documents, and I sat on the floor and laughed until it turned into sobbing, because there I was planning romantic surprises for a man who was probably already texting my cousin while I wrote those notes. He told me, in one of our brief cold conversations about logistics, that he had realized he had made a mistake marrying me, and that he had only gone through with the wedding because he did not know he had other options. Hearing yourself called a mistake by someone you almost moved states for does something weird to your brain. The actual legal process dragged on for months because that is what these things do. I had to sit across from him in a small office while a bored-looking lawyer explained the division of the few things we had together, and he could not even meet my eyes. He signed papers like he was authorizing a furniture delivery, and I signed them like I was signing away the last version of myself who still believed in happily ever after. During that time, I did all the cliché things people do after a big breakup, except mine came with signatures and court dates. I cried in the shower so no one could hear me. I avoided family dinners like they were contagious. I threw myself into work at the clinic, staying late to organize supply closets and update schedules, just so I would not have to go home to that empty apartment. My friend from work kept checking on me, dropping off food, making sure I did not drown in my own thoughts for too many days in a row. One day, after a particularly rough morning where I had to answer questions from reception about why my last name had changed back in the system, that friend told me she had something to share that might make me angry, but would also maybe help me stop blaming myself. She had a contact at the church my cousin used to attend, and through a long chain of whispered conversations, she had discovered this was not the first time my cousin had blown up someone else's life for fun. Apparently, a few years back, my cousin had managed to get involved with another woman's fiancé, a quiet girl from their church who everyone thought was sweet and boring. The details were almost a copy and paste of my own story. They had all been in the same circles. My cousin had slid in with her charm and her "we just vibe" nonsense, and the guy had cheated and eventually left his fiancée. The scandal had stayed just under the radar because the families involved had covered it up, choosing to treat it like a moral lapse that could be fixed with a few months of distance and some public repentance. My family had known. I felt this cold, heavy anger settle in my chest when I heard that. It was one thing for a cousin to betray me. It was another to learn that the adults around us had seen this exact pattern before and chosen to pretend it was a one-time thing, never thinking to warn me or maybe keep her away from married men at family events. I asked my friend how she knew all this, and she said there was another woman, the previous fiancé, who was willing to talk. We met at a small coffee shop near my job one afternoon. She was pretty in a quiet way, with tired eyes that said she had moved on enough to function, but not enough to ever fully forget. She told me her story in a calm voice, like she had rehearsed it for therapy and was now sharing the polished version. She had been engaged, planning a wedding, and my cousin had shown up, all friendly and supportive, offering to help with vendors and decorations. Somewhere between cake tastings and dress fittings, lines had been crossed, and by the time she realized what was happening, it was already too late. Her fiancé had left her for my cousin, just like mine had. There had been whispers at church, awkward prayer circles, a brief burst of judgment aimed at my cousin that faded quickly once people decided it was between them and their conscience. No one had called the cousin a predator to her face. No one had warned the next potential victim. They had just moved on, because discomfort is apparently more unbearable than injustice for a lot of people. Listening to her felt like watching a twisted preview of my own story, and it was the first time I really believed deep down that none of this had been about me not being enough. My cousin had made a sport out of targeting men who were already taken, and my husband had happily volunteered to be the next willing idiot. It was a messed up partnership, not a random accident. The divorce finally became official a few months after that. I went to the courthouse in a dress that used to be my cute date night outfit and signed the last stack of papers. When I walked out, the sky was that dull gray that sits over the city like a heavy blanket, and I remember thinking there should be some dramatic thunder or at least a sad song playing somewhere. Instead, a bus drove by, someone honked at a pedestrian, and life went on like nothing in the world had just ended. I started therapy around that time, mostly because my friend insisted that I could not keep processing everything through drive-through fries and bathroom breakdowns. The therapist's office was small and full of plants, and she had that calm voice that makes you want to confess your entire childhood in the first session. We talked about the marriage, sure, but we also talked about my family, about the way I had always been the one who picked up pieces and smoothed over awkward moments, the way I never wanted to be the person who made things messy. She pointed out, very gently, that I had bled myself dry to keep other people comfortable. Therapy did not magically fix everything, obviously. It was not like I walked into that office once and walked out a brand new woman with perfect boundaries and a color-coded emotional toolkit. It was more like I dragged myself there week after week and slowly peeled back layers I did not even know were there, like realizing how much of my personality had been built around keeping the temperature in every room neutral so no one would blow up. How many times I had laughed things off that actually hurt because I did not want to be called dramatic. There were sessions where I spent the entire hour talking about my grandmother and how guilty I felt for resenting that weekend at the retreat even though none of this had been her fault. And other sessions where I circled around the same sentence for what felt like forever, trying to say out loud that maybe I had been a good wife and he had still chosen to leave. My therapist would ask simple-sounding questions that landed like punches. Things like, "What would you say to a friend who told you this story?" Or, "When did you first learn that your feelings were less important than keeping the peace?" And I would sit there on that worn-out couch with a box of tissues between us, realizing that I did not actually know how to answer without blaming myself. Outside those walls, life kept moving in its boring, relentless way. I still had to clock in at the clinic, smile at patients who complained about wait times, chase down signatures from doctors who treated administrative staff like we were background noise, pretend I was fine when someone asked casually how married life was, and I had to say, "Actually, we are not together anymore," and watch their face do that awkward sympathy twist. At night, I would go home to my too-quiet apartment, microwave something you could barely call dinner, and scroll through that social media app while telling myself I was only looking at dog videos and recipes, even though my thumb always hovered a little too close to the search bar where their names used to live. Some nights I gave in and typed anyway, then immediately closed the app before the results could load, like I could outrun my own curiosity by tapping the screen fast enough. I blocked my cousin and my ex-husband on all platforms after the courthouse day, because I knew myself well enough to understand that I would obsess over every post if I did not. For a while, it worked. My feed became puppies, recipes, and random memes again, and I let myself breathe. Then one afternoon, months later, a mutual cousin texted me a screenshot I had not asked for. It was a picture of my ex-husband and my cousin on top of a hill at sunset, dressed in coordinated outfits, kissing like some kind of discount romance advertisement. The caption was about finally finding the right person and trusting the timing of your life, which was rich, considering their timing involved other people's broken homes. There were hearts and congratulations in the comments, and one of my aunts had written something about how love always wins, which almost made me throw my phone across the room. Even though I had tried to block everything, the algorithm still found ways to sneak them in through tags and mutuals. So I had to do a second round of digital cleanup, muting, blocking, and unfollowing anyone who insisted on reposting their love story. It felt petty and dramatic, but every time I saw their faces, my body reacted like I was back in that kitchen with the video playing on my phone. Just when I thought the worst parts were behind me, my mother called me on a random afternoon and asked if I had checked my mail. Not my email, my actual physical mailbox, which is never a good sign. I told her I had not, and she got weirdly quiet and said I should. Because something had arrived from my cousin. My stomach dropped. I went down to the lobby of my building, opened the little metal door with my number on it, and there it was. A thick, cream-colored envelope with my name written in fancy calligraphy. I did not even have to open it to know what it was, but I did anyway, hands shaking so hard I ripped the side instead of the top. Inside, there was an invitation to their wedding, printed on heavy paper with flowers and cursive fonts, announcing their union in some poetic language that made me want to vomit. They were getting married at a property owned by someone from his side of the family. A big rustic-style thing with a yard and lights and all the usual decorations you scroll past online. The wording made it sound like a fairy tale. There was even a line about how sometimes the right path finds you after unexpected turns. Which is such a dramatic way to say, we blew up a marriage and decided to throw a party about it. Along with the invitation came the usual chorus of family voices. Some cousins messaged me to say they were sorry I had gotten the invite, that they could not believe she had the nerve to send it, that they thought it was insensitive. Others tried the neutral route, saying things like, maybe she is trying to extend an olive branch, or it would be nice if everyone could move on and be mature. My mother called it an opportunity for healing, as if I should be grateful to be offered a seat at the table where my ex-husband and my cousin would celebrate being soulmates. I knew I was not going, obviously. That part was not even up for debate. What I did not know at first was that I was going to do something else instead. That idea came slowly, like a storm forming on the horizon. And even when it was fully formed, I still had a moment where I thought, I am not this person. I do not make scenes. But the thing about being pushed around and silenced for long enough is that eventually, there is a breaking point where you stop caring about how it looks and start caring about what is true. I kept thinking about that other woman, the former fiancé from the church, and how my family had watched her life implode without using that as a lesson or a warning for me. I thought about my grandmother's apologetic eyes when she told me on the phone that she loved me, but she was too old to handle more drama, that she would probably attend the wedding just to keep the peace. I thought about my mother's preference for appearances over honesty. And I thought about all the times people had told me to take the high road, which is usually code for let people walk all over you quietly so we do not have to watch. So I called that other woman and asked if she would be willing to help me. I told her I was not planning anything illegal or dangerous, just something honest and maybe a little loud. She hesitated for a second. Then she laughed and said she had waited years for someone to actually hold my cousin accountable for her pattern. We met again at that same coffee shop and we started gathering receipts. We printed screenshots of messages between my cousin and her former fiancé, the ones she had given to her therapist years ago, and kept saved in a private folder she had emailed to herself before she finally deleted his number. We printed dates and times of posts that showed overlap between their friendship and his engagement, using nothing more complicated than old pictures and public captions. We collected messages from my own story too. After he moved out, he forgot an old tablet at our place that he barely used, and honestly, I think he assumed it had been wiped or that it did not matter anymore. But when I turned it on one night out of curiosity, it was still logged into his messages. So I scrolled back to the days of the retreat and took screenshots of the way she had been texting him while I was busy walking my grandmother up and down those stairs. My friend from work had also kept the photo and video from the bar saved on her phone, so we added those to the pile and printed everything, and we wrote down a brief timeline of events, just the facts. I put everything into neat folders, because apparently my inner administrative assistant never sleeps. Even when I am planning emotional chaos, I ended up with 4 identical folders, each with a simple cover page that said, "Before you celebrate this love story, please read the full history." It was petty. It was dramatic. It was also, in my opinion, overdue. The day of the wedding arrived humid and cloudy. One of those days where your hair refuses to cooperate and the air feels heavy. I did not go to the ceremony, obviously. I let them have their vows and their promises and their staged photos under some arch covered in flowers. I waited until later, until the reception, when people would have loosened up their collars and poured more drinks, and when the happy couple would be too busy basking in attention to notice me slip in. The reception was in the large yard behind the house, with round tables covered in white cloths, strings of lights hanging overhead, and a small stage for the band in the corner. I parked a little down the road, took a deep breath, grabbed my bag with the folders inside, and walked in like I belonged there. Because, technically, I did. I am family, remember? No one stopped me. For a few minutes, I just observed. My cousin was in a fitted dress that looked like it had been chosen specifically to make everyone stare. My ex-husband was in a suit that did not suit him as well as he thought it did, laughing with his friends, holding her waist like she was the trophy he had always wanted. People were eating, drinking, taking pictures, posting them to that app with captions about true love and finally. I spotted 4 people I knew I needed on my side if this was going to land the way I wanted. His mother, who had always treated me like a temporary guest in her son's life. The officiant, who had performed our ceremony and had just performed theirs. The aunt who spreads news in the family faster than any online feed ever could. And the woman my cousin had begged to be her maid of honor, who I knew secretly had doubts but never felt allowed to say them out loud. I walked up to each of them in turn, handed them a folder, and said something vague but direct like, "I thought you might want to see this," or, "Please read this before you say anything tonight." They looked confused but took them. I did not explain further because I wanted the pages to do the talking. Then I walked toward the little setup where the band and the microphone were. I could have just left it at the folders, honestly, but the more I watched them clink glasses and pose, the more I felt my spine straighten. So when I saw that they were about to start the toasts and the DJ was literally handing the microphone around to whoever wanted to say something, I just slipped into the little line of people waiting, stepped up to the person handling the music, and asked if I could say a few words. He nodded without even asking who I was, probably assuming I was just another cousin running late with a speech. My voice shook a little when I started talking, but by then it was too late to back out without making it even weirder, so I kept going. The chatter around the yard quieted slowly, like a wave pulling back from shore. My cousin's smile faltered when she saw me, and my ex-husband's face went pale in that way that is almost funny if you're not too busy trying not to pass out yourself. I could have made a speech full of insults, but that is not what I did. I took a breath and said that I was not there to stop their wedding or beg anyone to take sides, because those ships had sailed. I said I was there because a lot of people in our families like to talk about truth and integrity and doing the right thing, and yet somehow, whenever my cousin's behavior hurt someone, everyone chose silence. I held up one of the folders and said that before they all raised their glasses to celebrate this love story, they deserved to know that it was built on 2 broken engagements, a broken marriage, and a pattern of chasing people who were already committed to someone else. While I spoke, I could see pages turning at different tables. His mother's face went from confusion to horror as she read messages from my cousin, bragging about how easy it had been to get him alone during the retreat. The officiant tightened his jaw as he saw screenshots from years earlier, where my cousin had written to that other woman's fiancé about how their connection was too special to ignore, even though he was already taken. My aunt's eyes widened and then narrowed, and I could practically hear the family group chats forming in her head. I kept my voice as steady as I could and walked them through the timeline. I mentioned that while I was helping my grandmother walk up and down those stairs, my husband and my cousin had been sending each other flirty messages from separate rooms. I mentioned that 3 days after that retreat, they had made plans to hang out alone, and that by the time I confronted him about his late nights, they were already meeting up behind my back. I mentioned the previous fiancé's story too, without using her name. Just enough detail so people would understand this was not a one-off mistake, but a consistent pattern of blowing up other people's lives for fun. My cousin tried to interrupt a few times, yelling that I was crazy and obsessed, but it is hard to dismiss printed evidence that is literally sitting in people's hands. My ex-husband just stood there, jaw clenched, looking like he was trying to decide whether to drag me away from the microphone or pretend this was not happening. I finished by saying I wished them exactly what they had given us, the chance to live with the consequences of their choices. Then I handed the microphone back, picked up my bag, and walked away. I did not stay to watch the meltdown. Part of me wanted to, obviously, because I am still human, and who does not want to see a little live-action karma when they are hurting. But my legs were shaking and my heart was pounding so hard I could taste it. So I left. I made it to my car, closed the door, and then finally let myself cry. Not the weak, quiet tears I had been shedding in bathrooms for months, but the big, ugly sobs that leave you gasping for air. You would think that after a stunt like that, my family would either cut me off completely or crown me their new patron saint of honesty. Instead, they did what families always do when confronted with mess. They scheduled a meal. Within a week, my mother had organized a Sunday lunch at her house, inviting me, my father, a few aunts and uncles, and my grandmother so we could talk about what happened like adults. The way she said adults made it sound like I had been a toddler throwing food instead of a woman reading aloud from receipts. I went because I was tired of guessing where everyone stood. The house smelled like roasted meat and anxiety when I walked in. My mother hugged me stiffly, like I was a guest she did not know what to do with. My father patted my back and avoided eye contact. We all sat around the table, plates piled high, and for a few minutes, everyone talked about weather and random shows like nothing had happened, which almost made me laugh. Eventually, my mother cleared her throat and said we needed to address the situation. She said she understood that I was hurt, that no one blamed me for feeling upset, but that what I had done at the wedding had been a lot. She kept using words like spectacle and scene, like my biggest crime was embarrassing people, not exposing ongoing behavior. One of my uncles chimed in about how airing family problems in public was never wise, and an aunt nodded so hard I thought her head would fall off. I listened to all of it, letting it swirl around me like static, until my grandmother let out this tiny sigh and said, very quietly, that she should have spoken up sooner. Everyone turned to her like she had suddenly started speaking another language. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said that she remembered the church fiancé situation, that she had known my cousin had gone after someone else's man before, and that she had wanted to warn me when she started seeing my husband cozy up to her at family events. She had been told not to. Apparently, there had been a whole conversation years ago among the older relatives about how my cousin was going through a phase, and that labeling her as some kind of predator would ruin her chance to change. They had decided as a group that the best thing to do was encourage her to do better, not bring up the past, and absolutely not tell younger women to be careful around her, because that would be unfair. My grandmother had disagreed quietly but gone along with it, and now here we were. Hearing that was like being punched in the chest and hugged at the same time. I was glad to know I was not crazy for thinking there was a pattern, but I was furious that the people who were supposed to protect me had chosen to protect her reputation instead. I looked at my mother and asked if she had known too, and the silence that followed was my answer. She did the whole, "We did not think it would happen again" speech, saying they truly believed my cousin had learned from her past mistakes, and that they did not want to stigmatize her forever. I asked if anyone had considered that by not saying anything. They were practically handing her new victims wrapped in trust. The room got very quiet. Someone muttered something about forgiveness and moving on, and I felt something inside me snap. I told them very clearly that I was done being the reasonable one. I said I was done carrying the burden of keeping everyone comfortable while they ignored actions that kept hurting people. I told them I would no longer attend any event where my cousin was present, that I did not want to hear about her, that I was not interested in being in the same room as my ex-husband ever again. Of course, someone tried the guilt trip, saying that family is family and life is short, and did I really want to hold on to anger like that? I said my anger had kept me alive on nights when I wanted to disappear, and that until they understood that, there was not much more to say. My grandmother squeezed my hand under the table. My father stared at his plate, and my mother looked like she wanted to argue but did not have the right words. I finished my food, thanked my grandmother for cooking, and left. In the months that followed, I built a new routine that was mine alone. I moved out of the apartment I had shared with my ex-husband because the walls felt haunted by our arguments and his lies. I found a smaller place on a quieter street, with creaky floors and bad insulation, but every object in it belonged to me, and me alone. I bought mismatched furniture from online listings, painted one wall a color that made me happy, and cried the first night I slept there because it was the first time in a long time I felt safe in my own bed. At work, I kept my head down and did my job. But eventually, the clinic manager pulled me into her office and told me she had noticed how I had held everything together, even while my personal life was a mess. She said they were restructuring some roles and asked if I would be interested in stepping up into a coordinator position, which would come with more responsibility and a small raise. It was not a fairy tale rescue, but it felt like proof that I could build something solid that had nothing to do with being someone's wife or someone's daughter. Therapy became my standing weekly appointment, a place where I did not have to be the strong one or the forgiving one. We talked about boundaries, a word I had always thought sounded cheesy until I realized I had lived most of my life without any. I learned how to say no without writing a 3-paragraph explanation afterwards. I learned how to sit with uncomfortable feelings without rushing to smooth them away. I learned how to admit that I was still angry and hurt without apologizing for it every 5 minutes. Every once in a while, gossip filtered back to me about my ex-husband and my cousin. Apparently, their marriage was not the picture-perfect story they had sold online. There were rumors of screaming matches that neighbors could hear through the thin walls of their rental, of him losing his job after too many emergency days off, of her complaining that he was not the spontaneous, fun guy she thought she had stolen away. I would be lying if I said that hearing that did not bring a small, petty smile to my face sometimes. But the satisfaction was shorter and quieter than I imagined it would be. Mostly, I felt relief that I was no longer inside that chaos. My relationship with my family shifted, but did not completely dissolve. I saw my parents less, visited my grandmother more, and kept a mental list of topics I refused to entertain. When someone tried to bring up my cousin at a holiday event, I would get up and refill my drink, or change the subject, or simply say, "I am not talking about her," and let the silence do the rest. A few relatives respected that. Others did not, but their opinions started to matter less and less as my life filled with people who actually showed up for me. The fallout from the wedding stunt did not happen all at once in some big cinematic wave. It was more like these little ripples that kept showing up in weird places. There was the aunt who pulled me aside in the grocery store a few weeks later, right between the cereal and the canned soup, and said in this low voice that she was sorry for how harsh she had sounded at the lunch, that she had been embarrassed and scared and defaulted to defending the side of the family that made the most noise, but that when she read every page in that folder at home, she had sat at her kitchen table and cried. She told me she had stopped following my cousin on that social media app, and that she was tired of pretending not to see patterns just because it was inconvenient. And hearing that did not erase anything, but it did make something unclench in my chest for a minute. A cousin who had always been glued to my cousin's group quietly messaged me one night saying she had turned down an invitation to a barbecue at their place because she did not feel comfortable bringing her kids around someone who thought other people's commitments were a game, and that she did not want to act like everything was fine just so the family pictures would look good. My mother never gave me the big teary apology I used to fantasize about, but she did start doing these small, almost awkward things, like calling me just to ask how my week had been without immediately pivoting to updates about the couple, or inviting me to events where she knew my cousin would not be there. My father, who had mostly stayed quiet through the whole thing, started sitting a little closer to me at gatherings, making dumb little jokes that were clearly an attempt to remind me he was on my side even if he had not known how to show it earlier. And when someone tried to bring up my cousin in front of me one afternoon, he put his fork down and said very calmly that we were not doing that today. None of it erased the years of being told to swallow things for the sake of family harmony. But those small shifts mattered, because they meant I was no longer the only one willing to break the script. And for once, the price of telling the truth was not being paid only by me. Somewhere in all that slow rebuilding, there was a coworker, a quietly funny guy who worked in another department and had a habit of leaving little sticky notes with jokes on the coffee machine. He knew enough about my situation to be cautious, and he never pushed, just kept being kind in that consistent, unflashy way that sneaks up on you. One day, after months of sharing small talk and the occasional lunch break, he asked if I would ever be open to grabbing dinner outside of work, with no pressure and no expectations. The old version of me might have overthought it into oblivion, but the new, bruised, slowly healing version took a breath and said yes, with the clear caveat that I was not anywhere near ready for anything serious. He said that was fine, that he just liked my company and thought it would be nice to talk without the time clock running. On our first dinner, I kept waiting for some red flag to jump out, some sign that he was secretly a chaos magnet. And when the check came, The only thing I had noticed was that he listened when I talked and did not flinch when I made a dark joke about wedding invitations. I do not know where that story will go yet, and honestly, I am okay with that. For the first time in a long time, my life does not feel like something happening to me while I am busy cleaning up the mess. It feels like something I get to participate in on purpose. Sometimes, when I am at my sink in my little apartment, washing dishes after work, I still catch myself glancing at that spot where the ring used to sit. It is empty now. I finally moved the ring out of the dish and into a small box at the back of a drawer. I did not throw it into a river or melt it down or sell it to fund some dramatic reinvention. I just put it away, because it is a part of my story, but it is not the whole story. If you had told me, back when I was 23 and walking down that aisle, that I would one day crash my own ex-husband's wedding and read out his dirty laundry into a microphone, I would have laughed in your face and called you crazy. But here we are. I am not proud of every single thing I did, and I know some people will forever think of me as the one who made a scene. And honestly, that is fine. They can keep their neat little narratives. I will keep my messy, honest, painfully earned peace. And if that makes me the villain in their version, honestly, I can live with that a lot easier than I can live with being my own doormat again.